So, if you were to ask me what good has come out of 2020, for me, it was that I found the Blessing 2s. And for extremely cheap, might I add. These are probably one of the best IEMs I've heard in a very long time for not so much of a price. These come at like $300, and these have replaced the Andromedas and a lot of high-end IEMs for me. Now, these are my personal unit, and I bought them secondhand from some guy. These are quite damaged actually, and the faceplate has scratches all over it. He managed to open up the glue to the faceplate so it can open up like this now. I've glued it together. It keeps on falling apart, unfortunately, and there's quite a bit of dings in the shell. I've compared these to a Mint Blessing 2, but I was not able to perceive any sound differences between the two, except for the fact that the faceplate is sort of wobbly sometimes if you don't handle this carefully, but that's fine. Um, Now, this unit I bought myself, so this review is completely of my own opinion. I'm not affiliated to any store or any brand whatsoever. So let's just straight get into the review. Now, TLDR of the Blessing 2s, they're a huge IEM. The shell of these are extremely big. I have the Andromedas with me right now to just compare side to side. Like, they're massive. These are massive. They're freaking massive. The Blessing 2s are huge, but they also have very huge sound. They're extremely pleasant. They're Harman target IEMs with a little bit less bass, and they're just very coherent. These are hybrid IEMs, by the way, very coherent. 4BA, one dynamic driver, and probably why I really like these, because the bass on these are just quite amazing, I would say, which we'll get into more detail right now. So the bass of the Blessing 2s is probably one of the best bass I've heard in a while. They have quite a bit of texture. The sub bass slam is very nice. There's quite not just quite, but there's definitely mid bass punch that you can feel. EDM, I think, as long as you're not a hard bass head, if you're more of a quality bass head instead of a quantity bass head, I think these will satisfy you easily. These have probably one of the best bass that I've heard, well, in a while, like I mentioned earlier, and it's just bass that you can only really achieve if you use a dynamic driver. Unfortunately, it's hard to put into words in a video how the dynamic driver sort of bass compares to BA bass. You will have to listen to that yourselves, and you'll understand what I mean. And the bass on these are also not sloppy or slow. They don't bleed into the mid range, and it's not the fastest bass in the world, definitely, but it never really falls behind. Now, overall, it's not as emphasized as the Harman target would normally be. So it's not overly bearing as such, like the Galaxy Buds Plus or the MH755s. So if that's one of your like if it was a point that wasn't really selling for you in terms of the Harman target, if it was too much bass, these will probably do it for you. Now, let's get into the mid-range next. And the mid-range of the Blessing 2s, I think, are one of the what I would perceive as neutral, except for the upper mid peak. So one of the problems I have with the Harman target, and why I don't normally like the Harman target, is that the mid-range, especially in the upper mids, is quite emphasized. So the lower mids of the Blessing 2s are indeed quite weighty. It's not the heaviest, not the thickest mid-range in the world, but male vocals and such, I think, are they're conveyed quite well. There's still adequate weight. It never gets too bloaty in the mid range, and it's nice. The upper mids is where I sometimes have problems. So the upper mids are a bit shouty sometimes. There might be a bit too forward, but that, to me, I think that's nitpicking, and it depends on the music that I also listen to. This usually happens if I listen to music that's more stuff like J-pop, I suppose, and more Western music. Doesn't really, I don't really have this issue. Um, there's just not a lot of things to complain about in the mid-range, if at all. I'm nitpicking here, I would say. Um, the detail in the mid-range is definitely, it's great. Detail and separation in the mid-range is absolutely amazing, I would say. And this trend also follows into the treble. The treble region in the Blessing 2s is slightly emphasized. It's not as emphasized as, let's say, something like the Andromedas. You don't have this a massive arenas that you have for something like on the Andromedas, but they are not too forward. They're quite detailed. They might come as harsh sometimes, very rarely, but I think that's mostly because of the revealing nature of the Blessing 2s in terms of your how they represent music. And the extension in Blessing 2s is quite okay. It's not the most extended IEMs I've heard in a while, um, in this price range, which is understandable. But I don't really have the ears to perceive such differences in most of my music anyway. Um, my hearing cuts off at around 17K, so I don't really mind it. Um, detail in the treble again is great. Speed is adequate. If you listen to something like Dragon Force, it can sometimes still keep up. Not always, but that's fine for me. Dragon Force is a high standard, and for this price point, I don't really have a lot of complaints at all. And I don't listen to that type of music most of the time anyway. So now we'll get into soundstage and imaging next. So the soundstage of the Blessing 2s are, if this were my head, the soundstage of the Blessing 2s are, they're just around my head. Sometimes I perceive them to be a bit more forward into my head actually, which is quite odd to me. I don't understand how they were able to achieve this, because normally if you have this sort of quantity in terms of bass, it would sound a bit more closed in, but for some reason you don't. And the imaging on the Blessing 2s are also quite good. I would be able to perceive the origin of sound at about like 35-ish degrees. I can determine where they're coming at. Now we'll just straight up go into just build quality, accessories, and the like. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, so the Blessing 2s that I have with me are, sort of broken. The faceplate has come off. The glue for the faceplate is, I don't think it's really that strong, but considering the damage that has been done to the shell, because the previous owner dropped these on the asphalt, like on the road, and then stepped on them, and they're still able to withstand that. I think it goes two ways in terms of how you can perceive this. At one side, you can say that the shell was able to withstand such torture, being stepped on the floor and not just completely cracking. And another side, you can say that, well, the faceplate wasn't glued that well, and now it's come off. Well, yeah, but it's not unfixable. It's just that I've genuinely been too busy and a bit too lazy to fix these properly, and it just hasn't given me enough trouble in order to attempt to fix this properly. I've used some glue, but, well, as you can see, the glue, I was using some LCD glue. It hasn't done the job quite well. I should probably be using some sort of resin or something. Now, in terms of size, these are just freaking huge, and I think this is one of the most common complaints that I hear from people, and especially if I read reviews online, is that some people's ears were not able to actually handle the size of the Blessing 2s. These are It's an understatement on how massive these are. These are this probably the size of most CIMs that I've had the pleasure of handling, and comparing these to something like the Andromedas, I can see why people can have issues with how they fit. My ears are medium size. I wouldn't say they're too big, and I was able to fit the Blessing 2s no problem at all. But the way that the shell is shaped right now, I've wanted to make these into CIMs for such a long time. I've consulted a few CIM companies here locally and overseas. They've given me not quite clear answers, because the shape of the Blessing 2s and the uh, driver configuration here is actually quite integrated into the shell. So I probably will have to give you more close-up pics, which I will probably do. I'll embed them into the video, but there's quite a lot of, how do I say this? The Blessing 2s are made with 3D printing. If the material was supposed to be believed, on marketing material was supposed to be believed from Moondrop, and the shell, these tubes in the shell, they're 3D printed. So trying to transfer these into some other shell will essentially break these. So you'll have to build another shell on top of the existing shell in order to be able to make this into a CIM. So that was the solution that was suggested to me, but I haven't really gone into if we should try this or not, because if we were to add some more resin on top of the shell, it will probably become too big. On topic of being too big, the Blessing 2 is probably one of the first problems you'll see is that the nozzle of the Blessing 2s are also quite big, and they don't really have some sort of notch for ear tips to get stuck onto. So if you use some ear tips, let's say like the SpinFit CP100s, they will fit definitely, but they come off very easily, like very easily. It might not be easily conveyed in the video, but these come off very easily, and I've gotten ear tips stuck in my ears a couple of times actually, especially something like the Sony hybrids. These they just fall off on their own. Like, yeah. Currently, I have this Celestec on these, and they fit quite well. They don't fall off as easily. And the standard ear tips that come with the Blessing 2s also fit quite well, and complies as usual, just fit with anything. But I don't like complies on a shell that's already this big and is quite deep insertion. Yeah. Now the cable that's provided on the Blessing 2s are actually quite similar to what they are providing with the Moondrop Starfields, and the KXSS. I think these are called the Lace, I believe. I have reviewed this cable previously, so the difference of the cable of these with the Starfields is just the color. The Starfields have a blue color, these are just copper color. I got a similar cable when I bought the KXSS like 2 years ago, in what was it, 2018 or 2019, early 2019. Yeah, somewhere along that time. And I think this is probably still one of my favorite cheap cables, aside from the fact that it doesn't have a chin slider. If it had a chin slider, this would be the perfect cable for almost anything. They're quite supple. They don't really have much microphonics at all, especially if you have a chin slider. So what I normally do with these cables that don't have chin sliders is I get like some Velcro, wrap it around, and then make that as a chin slider. And they have an angle jack, like most IEMs should have. portable devices should have angle jacks. Don't sell us straight jacks. Those are hot garbage. I don't want straight jacks on my IEMs. Okay, I'll be using these on portable devices. I wanna plug these into an amplifier or some stuff like that. And even if I did, angle jacks are still better most of the time. For headphones, I can understand why you would want to give me straight jacks, but for IEMs, angle jacks are the way. I will be plugging these more into my phone than I would be into an amplifier. Now, we'll talk a bit about the box. The box, as per usual, Moondrop offering is, well, decorated with one of their characters, anime sort of characters, as they normally do. And the box itself is quite big. It's quite big. But one of the reasons why that is because they give you this sort of, it's a fake leather pouch. It's quite sturdy. Actually, it's quite hard. If it doesn't compress much at all, so your IEMs will be safe in here, I would say. But I don't think these are waterproof. I have not tested that. I probably should have tested that, but I didn't really want to ruin the case. And I don't use this case at all. Daily I use some sort of like, for daily usage of a case, I carry around these. I use a Pelican case. These are definitely waterproof, and if you're buying IEMs at this price and carrying them everywhere like I do, I would suggest you getting some sort of case like this, like a proper Pelican case, not one of the cheap KZ ones, especially because of how big these IEMs are. And I'm able to fit these IEMs and the Bluetooth receiver, the BTR5 that I use with them, so it's quite neat actually. But anyway, so the case itself is quite big. It definitely fits the Blessing 2. It doesn't fit a lot of things aside from the Blessing 2s. You can probably carry around a couple of spare of ear tips aside from the Blessing 2s itself, but there's not a lot of space left in the case if you are planning on using the case. It has this sort of like place where you can put in spare ear tips or maybe a spare cable, I suppose. But yeah, I don't think this case is too big, and I don't think it's too small. I think it's just there in terms of size. Maybe if it were a bit smaller and probably less, if it was a little bit less thick, it would probably be still okay, so that you can carry it a bit more, a bit easier. I mean, you won't be able to put these into your what's it called? Shit, I forgot. You won't be able to put these into your jeans. These will become a huge bulk. Like, these are thicker than my wallet normally. And in terms of accessories, you get quite a few pairs of ear tips. The ear tips that you get with the Blessing 2s are, as per usual, the Moondrop ear tips material, so they're quite hard. They're not the softest pairs of ear tips that I've ever tried, but they have a sort of different nozzle adapter. They're quite a bit larger in terms of nozzle size. Because, well, the nozzle size of the Blessing 2s are huge. You get like, how many pairs of ear tips is this? I forgot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pairs of ear tips. I don't really like these ear tips. I just swap them out for Celestex immediately. And miraculously, for some reason, they provide you with an airplane adapter. I don't know why you would want to never ever plug your IEMs directly into an airplane connector. That's a bad idea. That's a disaster waiting to happen. I would suggest getting something like the i5 IE Match before you plug in your IEMs into the airplane adapter, because airplanes usually have quite huge output impedance and quite huge power, so that it would normally you can risk blasting your ears, which is not what we want to have, not what we want to do. So yeah, Now comparisons. We'll just do quick comparisons because there's not a lot of comparisons I can do for you. Unfortunately, I don't really have a lot of IEMs in this price range, but to me anyways, the Blessing 2s have pretty much ruined this price range for me, because they just go head to head even with their high-end counterparts, which is the Moondrop A8s and the Moondrop S8s, and they just, to me, tonally they're more pleasing than the Campfire Andromeda. They're a bit technically inferior compared to Andromedas, but compared to something like the Campfire Solaris, 64 Audio U12Ts and stuff, they are still able to keep pace with them. So in terms of value, we're talking $300 versus $1,000. It's just that's $700 less, and you get sound that's not that far behind, if at all. I would say the bass of the Blessing 2s are superior compared to the Andromedas. The Andromeda's bass might be faster, so if you like to listen to faster paced music, these will definitely keep up better. But normally I would say the Blessing 2s are just a lot more pleasing. They're dynamic driver IEMs, they have dynamic driver bass. It's a whole different world. The mid range of the Blessing 2s, I think, are a bit they're a bit less detailed compared to the Andromedas. I'll give you that. They're a bit more shoutier than the Andromedas. I'll give you that. The treble region is faster on the Andromedas. There's a bit more detail and quite a bit more air in the Andromedas. And the Andromedas are also more isolating because they're fully sealed IEMs. Fitting wise, I prefer the Blessing 2s actually compared to the Andromedas, but that goes back to personal preference. And yeah, drivability, I should have mentioned this earlier. The Blessing 2s are not the easiest to drive IEMs. Plugging them into your phone will be fine, but these are a bit less sensitive, so you may want to turn up the volume a bit. You don't need an amplifier. Straight up, I will just say you don't need an amplifier. Whoever keeps recommending you to plug your IEMs into amplifiers, especially if they're BA IEMs like the Andromedas, it's absolutely not necessary. You don't need 500 milliwatts or fucking 2 watts in order to drive IEMs. They're not headphones, they're not speakers, man. You don't need that much power. It's just that they're less sensitive is all I'm trying to say, actually. And you might have to crank up the volume a bit on your phone. That's it. You don't need a dedicated DAC amp with 50 freaking watts of power. You don't need that. I've seen this being mentioned everywhere that, oh, you're gonna be needing an amplifier with the power equivalent to drive my speakers in order to get the best potential out of them. You don't. And these will drive just fine out of your phone most of the time. I'm using these with the Pocophone F1. Those will work fine. I've used them with BTR5, ES100s, and an amplifier such as the SMSL SP200s or the O2 stack, and there's not much difference, if at all. Now, aside from that pretty much wraps up my review. It's probably one of my longest reviews I've done in a while. It probably is my longest review. And yeah, these are the best things that I found in 2020. It's probably one of my best purchases ever. I got these very cheap because, well, in the condition that they're in, and for what you're getting, I don't think that if you have this money to spend on the IEMs, I don't think there's much option in this price range to which can beat the Blessing 2s. And these are my personal favorites. Yours might differ. I would just like to say it. This is probably not your end game, and it probably won't be mine also. But as of now, as of 2020, for this price, $300 US, which, by the way, if I should have mentioned this also, I got these for nearly only half of that, so that's even more value. Right now, for me, these are the best IEMs that you can get for that price, and even way beyond that. The Andromedas are no longer gonna be my daily drivers. I'm probably gonna sell them. So bye bye Andromedas. Like if you like this review, subscribe if you want more content like this, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time.